Good morning, everyone. It's Robin Green, owner and founder of Movies for Mommies. Welcome to our little chat today with Ask Emma. We want to welcome Emma Fogel, who is a registered social worker, and we understand this is a really challenging time for families. So we thought we would just have an Ask Emma session. We had sent out some invites to moms in our weekly newsletter, asking you to send in some questions of challenges you might be navigating, and Emma's here to answer some questions. So welcome, Emma.
Thank you for having me, Robin. I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. Well, listen, we're going to get started. Before we get to some of the questions, I'm going to open with my own question because it seemed to be a theme of a lot of them that came in. And the biggest question that came up was about self-care. So we know that this is a challenging time, and moms more than anyone are trying to juggle, the kids, the family, the household, their partner's needs, and they put themselves at the end of the list. And, if you vaguely remember air travel when they would say, if there's an emergency, put the mask on the adult first and then the child. It's really a metaphor of life. You have to look after yourself in order to be able to properly look after others. So, Emma, what advice do you have for moms, who don't have a lot of time, but really they need that self-care. It's so essential.
I'm going to start off by saying, and I know that it's almost overdrawn at this point by starting by saying it's a challenging time, but I think it's worth saying again that this is maybe particularly now in January with gray days, overwhelming, ongoing virtual school, or just all of us have felt too cooped up with our babies for too long. It's really hard to carve out time for self-care. But I don't necessarily want moms to think about it as you need an hour, right? Self-care is really about recharging your battery. If you feel like your battery is at 3%, increasing it to 5. So at this point in time, we've been stuck at home for months. Ever, right? I can't believe we're getting close to a year. And at this point, we're really at the bottom of the barrel here. So what I'm advising a lot of the people that I work with is think of yourself as a phone battery and what takes you from 3% to 5%. And that can be as simple as finding something in the day, whether it's 2 minutes, 5 minutes, or 20 minutes, that is time for you. It doesn't need to be improving yourself. It doesn't need to be meditating. It doesn't need to be making sure you get that laundry done. It just needs to be time with yourself where you're focusing on whatever you're going through at that moment. So that
It
could
could be
be.
as simple as actually taking time to wash and blow dry your hair.
That
And
was
feel
exactly what I was going to say. I find, the days are so crazy, they're hectic, they're chaotic, that at the end of the day, at 9:30, I put on a face mask for 3 minutes. And that is my time where I can be mindful, right? Just focusing on what I'm doing in the moment. The water feels hot. I may even cry, right? And just sort of noticing that that's okay. And it's those 3 minutes for me where I'm doing something that makes me feel good. Something else, honestly, I have a lot of moms telling me that they're sort of locking themselves in rooms and in being just alone for a couple of minutes. Being compassionate with yourself that you do need that time to increase your battery from 3 to 5%, whether it's giving yourself a slow sequenced hug from top to bottom, whether it's sitting on the floor and breathing deeply, or even if it's at the end of the day when you have no energy, but to lie on the bed and think about 3 things that happened in the day that you were proud of yourself for, or 3 things at the end of the day where something worked, or your baby responded to you in a way, you got a smile or a giggle. Those are teeny little bits of self-care where you can actually feel that sense of worth, positivity, and that we can continue on for another 24 hours.
That's great advice. That's really it's just being mindful of your time because moms need it. We're people too, and we need it. And we really, in order to be our best versions of a parent, we have to make sure that we're looked after too.
Well
Good.
said.
Thank you. Well, so I'm going to start with one of the questions that came in was from Jennifer in Vancouver, and it's about addressing loss. Again, some of the questions were very much about moms feeling a sense of loss. So she writes, Like many other moms, my baby was born during COVID. I was looking forward to my year of mat leave, meeting and socializing with other new moms, and going to movies, of course, doing fun things I saw my other friends doing. Of course, it didn't happen, and I'm feeling a sense of loss, like this was supposed to be a special time and it's gone. But I'm also concerned that a lot of those connections didn't happen. What advice do you have to deal with this sense of loss and frustration?
That's such a poignant, perfect, and very hard question. Because really the loss, a clinical word for that is grief. And especially, when I'm working with families or working with new parents or working with teenagers or children, what we are all going through is grieving what should have happened, would have happened, what we expected to happen. And maybe naming the fact, right here and now, that this wasn't fair, that what you expected to go through after having a baby and creating these new memories and new connections didn't happen, and that's okay, right? So really sort of naming that, putting it out there, and not putting any shame or guilt or blame on yourself that this is how you're feeling. But now, right, it's been almost a year, and I think maybe a part of where I'm finding a little bit of hope is that this is the worst time. We are currently in it. We are in the winter. The restrictions here in Ontario are the worst. And that we know that in a short period of time, the weather is going to improve and that things are going to get better. And the way that sometimes I find is helpful in working with loss is chunking time. So maybe allowing yourself to have that hour or afternoon where you're really allowing yourself to feel that sadness, to feel that grief, to maybe journal the grief, to reach out to a friend, to put a note in your phone, really sort of living in the grief, and then putting almost like a bookend, right? I had a really tough afternoon. How can I improve my evening? Because it's about sort of being in the loss, acknowledging the loss, and then chunking that time so that you can shift that loss to some hope. Having a FaceTime with another new mom, going on a Facebook group and sharing those feelings and feeling that connection and empathy with others that are undoubtedly feeling the exact same way as you. And knowing that even though you had that very tough afternoon, the evening could be better. And if it's not just an afternoon, the next day will be better. When we think about our time in terms of chunks, whether it's 15 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour, an afternoon, it allows us to feel some power and control over our mood, right?
It's like putting a foot in front of each other and not running a marathon in an afternoon.
Exactly, right? And when we think about the overwhelming loss, right, it can feel like we're drowning in quicksand. Right? So an important piece of this is that we need to put boundaries around our time so that if we have that time to feel the loss, to know the loss, to sit in the loss, we actually allow ourselves to pull ourselves out of the loss, look around and go, okay, how can I make this evening feel a little better? Call a friend, reach out to someone, write about it, read, or engage in the self-care.
So it's interesting what you said briefly about journaling or writing about it, that I'm a big proponent. I've journaled for years, and I find the healthiest way to get it out of your system, it doesn't have to be structural or a masterpiece, but just letting it spill out of your pen. Somehow it just goes through you, through the pen. You've acknowledged what you're feeling, and you feel lighter after you've done it. I think that's a really powerful tool, even if you might not be using a pen, a keyboard, an iPad, whatever it is you're using. Absolutely.
Exactly. And a piece to that, exactly what you just said, Robin, is that our thoughts, we are all anxious. We all are grieving. We are all feeling a little bit of hopelessness right now. That swarms us. It overwhelms us. It races us. When you write it down, it actually allows you to streamline, concentrate, and control. A lot of people go, I don't want to write about what I'm feeling. I already feel it. When you write it, you're actually almost downloading it into something else, like a USB key, and removing it so that it's almost like, I call it sometimes word vomiting or word dumping, everything that you're thinking, so that you feel like you're in a little bit more of control and that you can take that one foot in front of the other.
And I also feel that sometimes the things you think are so awful, when you see them on paper, they're awful, they're stressful, they're anxiety causing, but they're not as overwhelming as they appear when they're swirling around, as you explained.
Well, you know what? I often say to people, the way we are in our own heads is often quite negative, rude, and judgmental. That we sometimes need to remind ourselves that we need to talk to ourselves the way that we would talk to a friend. We need to talk to ourselves the way that we would talk to a child,
Such
right?
a great point.
We often talk to everyone else around us with compassion, empathy, kindness, and humor. And then when we get up here, we are terrible to ourselves. So keeping that in mind, and if you write that down, right, and you say, what would I say to someone else that was feeling exactly what I was feeling? The advice will often match.
Great. Listen, Emma, this is a great start to our series of Ask Emma. Uh, some really great tips for coping and for moms and for self-care. We want to thank you for your time. We know that you're going to be back in a little while. And for anyone out there who has questions or concerns or anxiety, Emma's here to answer your questions. You can email me at info@moviesformommies, FORMOMMIES.com, and we'll get Emma to answer your questions. So thank you so much for your time, Emma Fogel.
Thank you. Thank you.
We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.